It was their first day at the old family cabin. But to Marcus and his daughter Sophie, it wasn't just a place. It was a legacy. It was the wildflowers her mom once planted by the lake. The dock where they fished with Grandpa. And after the devastating loss of Sophie's mother, it was the only place left that Marcus believed could help his daughter heal. They arrived with hope. And heartbreak. Sophie broke down in tears the moment she stepped into the bedroom her mother used to sleep in. That cry, it echoed through the trees, heavy with sorrow. Just 20 minutes later, 3 police cars and a Child Protective Services officer showed up. No sirens, just quiet authority. And the caller, President Karen. From the window across the street, Karen stood with arms folded, watching like a hawk. She looked pleased. No evidence, no real concern. Just a cold assumption, a crying teenager. Must be trouble. Marcus came out completely stunned, as Karen told the social worker. I'm worried about the girl's mental health. Crying like that isn't normal. There could be abuse happening here. Sophie clung to her father. Terrified and confused. She was just 16, she had lost her mother, and now a complete stranger was trying to use the law to tear her away from her only remaining parent. Marcus took a deep breath, holding back his rage. She's accusing me based on what? Because we moved into our family cabin. But Karen didn't flinch. She feigned concern. I just want to protect the children in this community, she said. But her eyes told a different story. Control. Power. The satisfaction of watching others panic. Thankfully, facts still mattered. The police and CPS officer reviewed the documents, ownership records, Marcus's ID and even Sophie's therapy records. After nearly an hour, the verdict was clear. No signs of abuse. No cause for concern. Just grief. A girl mourning her mother, in the place that still held memories of her. As they were leaving, one officer turned to Karen and warned her about the legal consequences of filing false reports. But the damage had already been done. Sophie was still trembling. Dad, is she going to call more people? Are they going to take me away? Marcus pulled her close. No one is taking you from me. No one. But deep down, he was already burning with quiet fury. Karen had just started a war, and she didn't even know it. Part of him was defending his own name. But most of all, he was protecting the one person he had left in this world. After that first incident, Marcus thought it was over. That Karen was just a nosy woman who liked to meddle, and after being warned by the police, she would back off. But he was wrong. Karen didn't back off. She stepped back to plan. Just 3 days later, a violation notice was posted on the cabin door, printed on HOA letterhead, signed by HO President Karen herself. It claimed the cabin had violated quiet zone regulations and was negatively affecting nearby property values. Marcus stared at the paper, frowning. They had just moved in. They hadn't done anything. Just one evening, where Sophie cried in her mother's room. And now that was being turned into a neighborhood disturbance. He began to realize Karen didn't want order. She wanted control. The next day, a man claiming to be an HOA inspector showed up, demanding access to the property. Marcus asked for legal identification, but the man stammered. He had none. Marcus sent him away, but not long after, 2 more violation notices arrived. One for improper backyard usage, and another for non-compliant landscaping. For the first time, Marcus felt like he was living in a movie, where the villain wore the mask of legality, using policy as a weapon. And the target? His family. Sophie started losing sleep. Every knock on the car, every unfamiliar car driving past made her flinch. Dad, she's not going to stop, is she? Marcus held her hand tightly. No, she won't, but neither will I. He began digging into the HOA, its powers, its limits, its legal foundation. And the deeper he went, the more something felt off. He tried calling the number printed on the violation notices. Disconnected. He sent emails, bounced back as undeliverable. Marcus started to suspect, was this even a real HOA? Or just a well-crafted fraud? But the real breakthrough didn't come from Marcus. It came from Sophie. One late night, she opened her laptop and said softly, "Dad, I don't think she's allowed to do what she's doing. And I'm going to prove it." That night, Marcus didn't sleep. Not really. He sat on the porch of the cabin, eyes scanning the quiet trees, one arm resting protectively around Sophie, who had finally dozed off in a blanket beside him. She had cried herself to sleep, and even in slumber, her face twitched with distress. The haunting images of flashing lights, strange officers, and Karen's cold, calculated face had left her fragile and afraid. But Marcus wasn't just tired, he was focused, methodical, and furious. He wasn't a man of revenge, at least, he never had been before. But something about the way Karen had smiled while turning his daughter's trauma into a public display lit something inside him. A fire. A promise. The next morning, Marcus got to work. As a software engineer who worked remotely, he had time, resources, and a highly analytical mind. And now he had a mission to protect his daughter, expose the truth, and dismantle the web of control Karen had built in this community. The first red flag came when Marcus reviewed the violation notices that had appeared in their mailbox overnight. A thick bundle of them. Each one printed on what looked like official HOA letterhead, complete with penalties. Forts 200 for unauthorized occupancy, 400 for noise disturbance during moving hours, 600 for landscaping non-compliance, and another 300 for improper waste disposal. In one day they had racked up 2,500 in arbitrary fines. Marcus laid the documents out on the table, like puzzle pieces. He noticed inconsistencies almost immediately: vague wording, inconsistent formatting, and violation codes that didn't appear to match any known regulations. He looked up the HOA contact info printed at the bottom of each notice. The phone line was disconnected. The email address bounced back immediately. When Sophie came downstairs, her eyes still swollen and her voice barely above a whisper, Marcus tried to reassure her. But before he could say much, she walked over with her laptop open. "Dad," she said, "something's really wrong." Sophie had stayed up most of the night researching HOAs, property laws, and community forums. She showed Marcus her screen. Their property, the cabin, wasn't listed on any official HOA map or jurisdiction document. According to everything she could find, their cabin was a legal ghost. No record of HOA oversight, no listing on the community development map. "It's like we don't exist to them, except when it comes to these fake fines," Sophie said. A spark lit in Marcus's mind. Karen's campaign wasn't just personal, it was fraudulent. Determined to uncover the full truth, Marcus and Sophie dug deeper. They went up to the attic, rifling through old boxes of documents left behind by Marcus's grandfather. It was slow work, dusty and tedious. But they eventually found a manila folder containing AA-related documents dating back to the early 90s. Inside was what appeared to be an HOA membership agreement, bearing Marcus's grandfather's name and signature. At first glance, it looked official, and it terrified Marcus. Had his grandfather actually signed the cabin into the HOA? Sophie, ever the critical thinker, wasn't convinced. "Let me see this," she said. She pulled out a stack of birthday cards and letters written by Marcus's grandfather. Documents they'd saved in a keepsake box. Then she took out the magnifying glass she had ordered online for her school science project. She spent the next hour comparing the signature on the HOA agreement to his handwriting in those cards. The result: a revelation. "Dad," she said quietly, "this signature is fake. It doesn't match, not even close." Marcus felt a strange mix of anger and relief. Someone had forged the document. Someone had gone out of their way to fabricate their HOA membership. They dug further. Sophie cross-referenced the document's date 94 with public records on the cabin's original construction and the HOA's incorporation. The cabin was built in 1991. The HOA was established in 1995. Under Virginia state law, any property built prior to the creation of a homeowners association is exempt from its authority unless the owner voluntarily opts in through signed agreement. Which meant not only had the signature been forged, but even if it hadn't been, it was dated before the HOA legally existed. It was the smoking gun. Sophie sat back, the laptop still glowing on her knees. She looked at her father and whispered, "They have no legal power over us." Marcus sat in stunned silence. "They've been using fake documents to harass people. And we just proved it." They weren't just the victims of a vindictive HOA president. They were uncovering a much larger fraud. And this time, they weren't alone. The next morning, Marcus woke up with a different feeling: clarity. For the first time since returning to the cabin, he no longer felt like a victim. Sophie was already awake, sitting cross-legged on the floor with her laptop open, eyes laser-focused. She had built a full spreadsheet overnight. "These houses," she said, pointing to several property entries, "were built before 1995 just like ours. But they've been paying HOA fees for years. Illegally." Marcus stared at the screen, stunned. What started as a personal attack on his family was turning into something much larger. A systematic scam that may have affected dozens of families. "We need to tell people," Marcus said slowly. "But not by confronting Karen head-on. We'll just show the truth." So, he sent out handwritten invitations titled, "Historic Lakeside Tour, Discover the Truth About Our Community." No accusations, no drama, just facts, presented as a quiet educational event. That weekend, over 15 neighbors showed up. They gathered in the grassy clearing by the lake under the shade of towering trees. Marcus had set up poster boards, legal documents, and laminated photos. One sign read "Cabin built 1991, show established 1995. So who controls whom?" He began his presentation calmly, walking them through the original building permit from 1991, complete with county stamps. He then showed the incorporation paperwork for the HOA, filed 4 years later. Finally, he held up the county, issued exemption letter from 1996 confirming that his family's property was legally untouchable by the HOA. Then he spoke. "Any home built before an HOA was established is automatically exempt, unless the owner voluntarily opts in. That's not my opinion. That's the law. And if your house was built before 1995, you might be exempt too." The crowd went completely still. And then, Karen arrived. She marched across the lawn in a black pencil skirt and sharp heels, her eyes cold and sharp. Without a greeting, she barked, "This is an unauthorized gathering. It violates our HOA guidelines. He's spreading misinformation and trying to incite chaos. I demand you all leave immediately." No one moved. Karen's voice grew shrill. "If you don't leave, I will call for an emergency HOA meeting. You'll be banned from the community. Permanently." Still silence. Marcus didn't flinch. Instead, he calmly uncovered another board. This one displaying 12 violation notices that Karen had sent him in the past few days. Each was printed in color with the HOA letterhead. "These," Marcus said, turning toward the group, "are evidence of criminal harassment. Under state law, each false violation notice is worth 10,000 in personal fines. That's 120,000 in liability." Karen froze. Marcus continued, his voice steady, "And none of these violations are legal, because we were never under your authority. That signature on the HOA document, it's a forgery. And the exemption letter." He held it up. "It's real. Filed with the county clerk and still legally valid." A gasp rippled through the crowd. An elderly woman in the back raised a trembling hand. "My husband built our home in 1988. We've been paying HOA dues ever since. Are you saying we didn't have to?" Karen tried to speak, but no one was listening anymore. People began murmuring. Questions swirling. A middle-aged man turned to his neighbor and whispered, "If he has an exemption letter, how do we know she didn't lie to us too?" Karen turned pale. The once confident HOA president now looked cornered. Her carefully maintained image was crumbling in real time. After a few moments of stunned silence, Karen spun on her heel and stormed off, muttering threats about calling a lawyer and scheduling an emergency vote. But the damage had already been done. Neighbors who had once believed in her authority now questioned everything. One woman, a single mother with 2 small children, quietly approached Marcus. "Thank you. I thought I had no choice but to follow every HOA order, even when they didn't make sense. But you just gave us all hope." Across the lawn, Sophie was laughing softly with a group of teens, her first genuine smile in months. As the event wound down, Marcus placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder. "I'm proud of you," he said. Sophie looked up with determined eyes. "Dad, it's time we finish this." They knew exactly what was coming next, Karen's final attempt to maintain control. But this time the truth was already out, and the community was no longer afraid. The days following our discovery were a whirlwind of preparation, strategy, and purpose. Sophie was like a girl transformed. The grief-stricken teen who had once cried herself to sleep now sat cross-legged on the living room floor surrounded by stacks of folders, highlighting key pieces of evidence and organizing them into airtight sequences. She was driven by something more powerful than revenge, justice. And I knew that as long as she had something to fight for, she would keep healing. We spent hours together compiling the ultimate evidence binder. It included every violation notice, every fake HOA code Karen had cited, screenshots of social media posts, copies of the fraudulent signature, and the official county documents that proved we were legally exempt from HOA authority. But Sophie didn't stop there. She created a spreadsheet detailing every family in the neighborhood, their home's construction date, and whether or not they legally fell under HOA jurisdiction. It was more than data, it was a map of corruption. Karen hadn't just targeted us. She had run a long-term, systematic harassment campaign against multiple families, especially those less likely to fight back: elderly residents, single parents, and grieving families like ours. One evening, while digging through the final box of old paperwork from the attic, Sophie found a photo album wrapped in plastic. Tucked inside was a yellowed envelope addressed in my grandfather's handwriting. Inside was a letter dated 1996, addressed to the county board, affirming that our family property was opting out of all future HOA governance. The letter was attached to a stamped copy of the county's permanent exemption approval, signed, sealed, and filed. There was no question left. Our cabin was never part of Karen's HOA. But that wasn't the end. We had more than legal proof. We had a story. A story of a father and daughter trying to grieve in peace. A story of a bully exploiting her power. And a story of a community living in fear, manipulated by the illusion of authority. So I made a decision. Instead of quietly filing a lawsuit, we would shine a light on every corner of Karen's operation. I printed invitations to a historical lakeside community presentation, which I personally hand-delivered to every mailbox in the neighborhood. The invitation was carefully worded. Discover the hidden history of our community. Learn about the laws that protect long-standing residents. Reclaim your voice. Neighbors were curious. Over a dozen RSVP'd within the first day. 2 days later, we hosted the event at the small public pavilion by the lake. Sophie had printed large displays with historical maps, HOA formation dates, and a side-by-side comparison of real and fake documents. I prepared a calm, factual presentation, Not to attack Karen, but to educate. The turnout was better than expected. Over 20 residents arrived, many holding their own HOA notices, some looking nervous, others quietly hopeful. I started with a brief history of the lakefront area, showing when different homes were built. Then I introduced the concept of HOA jurisdiction and pre-existing exemptions, carefully citing state law. I explained that homes built before the HOA's fortune in 1995 were not subject to its rules unless the owners had voluntarily agreed to join. Something our family had never done. I showed our exemption documents, our grandfather's letter, and pointed out the fake signature Karen had forged. The room went silent. People started looking at one another, murmuring. A few pulled out their phones and began checking their own property records. One older woman began to cry. She had lived in her house since 1992 and had been paying thousands in dues for decades, without ever having signed a membership agreement. That's when Karen arrived. She marched into the pavilion without warning, flanked by two of her loyalists. Her expression was tight, calculated. She looked around at the displays, the neighbors, the folders, and then her gaze landed on me. This gathering was not approved by the HOA, she barked. You are spreading misinformation. I calmly invited her to sit and hear the evidence for herself. But she refused. This man is trying to destroy our community's unity, she announced loudly. He's misleading you with twisted legal interpretations. But the neighbors weren't buying it anymore. One man held up a copy of his property deed. Karen, why isn't my home listed on the HOA map if I've been paying dues since 1997? A single mother stepped forward. You threatened to fine me for my kids' sidewalk chalk drawings. Now I find out my house was built in 1993. Karen's face paled. She tried to redirect the discussion, but it was too late. The momentum had shifted. People were angry, emboldened, the fear had broken. And Sophie stood beside me, quiet but strong. Her eyes burned with resolve. We were no longer the outsiders. We were the spark of change. As word of the community education event spread through the neighborhood, the atmosphere in the lakeside community began to shift dramatically. More residents started coming forward, quietly at first, to share their own experiences with Karen. An elderly couple revealed that they had been threatened with fines if they didn't repaint their home a specific shade of beige, even though no such rule existed in the official HOA documents. A single father shared how he had paid over $4,000 in supposed landscaping violations, all based on arbitrary standards Karen had enforced by herself. The deeper we looked, the clearer it became this wasn't just a personal vendetta against our family. Karen had been running a rogue regime built on fear, misinformation, and fabricated authority. Sophie and I expanded our investigation. With the help of a neighbor named Louise, a retired real estate lawyer, we launched a full review of public records, state filings, and previous complaints. What we uncovered was stunning. Karen had been using a defunct HOA incorporation number, one that had been officially dissolved 5 years prior due to failure to meet annual reporting requirements. She had no legal right to collect dues, issue violations, or act on behalf of the HOA. Yet she had been doing exactly that for nearly half a decade. Lewis helped us draft a formal legal report. The document detailed every instance of fraud, including a timeline of Karen's fabricated enforcement actions, copies of invalid violation letters, and a record of funds collected under false pretenses. We compiled affidavits from at least 7 families who had been coerced or deceived into paying unlawful fines. Each page of the report told a part of a much larger, darker story, one of abuse of power under the guise of community service. Sophie took on the role of organizing a town hall meeting. This time, we wanted the entire community involved. She designed flyers, scheduled the event at the local library, and coordinated with a few supportive neighbors to help with logistics. The turnout was even larger than before. Over 60 residents filled the room, many standing in the back or sitting on windowsills, eager to learn the truth. When the meeting began, I stepped to the front with Sophie beside me. We didn't start with legal accusations or emotional appeals. Instead, we simply told the story of what had happened to us: the police call, the fake violation notices, and the nightmarish ordeal of being treated like criminals for moving into our own home. Then we shared the evidence. The original building permits, the county exemption, the forged signature, and finally, the official documents proving that the HOA, as it was currently being operated, had no legal standing at all. One by one, other residents stood to speak. Mrs. Henderson described how she had paid over $10,000 in fees that had nearly bankrupted her. A young mother shared how Karen had used fear tactics to prevent her children from playing in the neighborhood park. Another man held up a stack of violation notices that dated back years, none of which had ever been formally approved or reviewed by a board. And then came the most unexpected moment. One of Karen's former allies, a man named Brent who had served briefly on the original HOA board, stepped forward. He looked uncomfortable but resolute. "I need to admit something," he said. Karen pressured me to sign off on a lot of things I wasn't comfortable with. She said we were just being proactive. But now I realize she was manipulating us. She never held proper elections. There hasn't been a real board in years. It was all her. His words hit the room like a thunderclap. People gasped, whispered, and started murmuring in disbelief. The weight of Brent's confession validated what so many had suspected but been too afraid to say. At the conclusion of the meeting, we distributed printed copies of the legal report and encouraged residents to review their own property histories. We also introduced a petition to formally request a county investigation into Karen's actions and dissolve any remaining claim of HOA control, unless reconstituted through legal means. Within minutes we had dozens of signatures. That night, Sophie and I returned to the cabin emotionally drained but uplifted. For the first time, the tide had truly turned. The community was waking up. People were supporting one another, asking questions and taking back control. But we knew Karen wouldn't go quietly. She had built her identity on her role as HOA president. Losing that title meant losing the illusion of power she had clung to for years. And people like her, they don't give up without a fight. Sure enough, the very next morning, we found a new violation notice taped to our door. But this one was different. The letterhead was crudely printed, clearly copied at home. The violation was laughable. Unauthorized placement of outdoor seating for the Adirondack chairs Sophie had painted and placed on the porch. It was a last gasp, a paper tiger, but also a warning Karen wasn't done. We had exposed the fraud. We had the law on our side. But now we had to prepare for the final showdown, because the next move would be public, confrontational, and irreversible. And it was coming soon. That night, the community center buzzed with anticipation. It was standing room only, a sea of neighbors, some angry, some curious, many still unsure who to believe. The usual quiet HOA meeting had turned into a town-wide spectacle. People leaned forward in their seats, whispering among themselves, phones ready to record, eyes darting between Karen and Marcus. Karen stood at the front like she owned the place, flanked by two remaining board members who looked more nervous than supportive. She was dressed sharply, makeup flawless, every detail calculated. But beneath the surface, there was tension in her jaw, a slight tremble in her hands. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Karen began, her voice clipped and formal. "We are here to address the repeated violations, acts of non-compliance, and disruptive misinformation campaigns perpetrated by Marcus and his family." She clicked a remote and began her presentation, projecting grainy photos of Marcus' cabin, on the wall a swing set being installed, lawn chairs on the porch, and neighborhood kids playing by the lake. "These photos," Karen announced, "illustrate unauthorized modifications and unsanctioned gatherings, all in direct violation of HOA guidelines." Murmurs ran through the crowd. Some nodded, but many looked confused. Was this really what the emergency meeting was about? Karen pressed on. "Beyond the violations, this resident has been spreading false legals that threaten the stability and legal framework of our community." Marcus remained seated, hands folded, expression calm. Sophie sat beside him, clutching a folder of carefully prepared documents. Karen's voice rose slightly. "If we allow residents to defy our regulations and rally others to their cause, we lose the very fabric that binds this community." She ended with a flourish. "This is why I propose an immediate vote to permanently ban Marcus and his family from the HOA community." Scattered applause. But not the thunder support she expected. The room was divided, tense. Then, Marcus stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't shout. "Before you vote, I ask for just 10 minutes of your attention. Not for accusations. Just the truth." He plugged in his laptop. The screen at the front flickered and displayed a slide, timeline of construction and incorporation. Marcus pointed to two key entries. Cabin built, 1991. HOA established in 1995. Simple math, Marcus said. "We were here first." Next slide, Virginia state law, pre-existing properties. The language was clear. Homes built before an HOA is established are exempt from its authority unless a voluntary agreement is signed. Then, the knockout, county exemption letter 1996. Marcus held up the physical copy as the digital version appeared on screen. Signed, notarized, filed. "This letter grants our family permanent exemption from any HOA enforcement. This is not theory. It is legal fact." The room fell silent. You could hear someone's water bottle hit the floor. But Marcus wasn't finished. He turned the page in his presentation. 12 violation notices, documented harassment. Each notice, sent by Karen, was dated and matched to state anti-harassment statutes. Under Virginia law, each act of false enforcement, each fake violation notice, is worth $10 in personal liability, Marcus explained. "These are not HOA matters. These are personal offenses." The screen updated to show the total 12 violations x 10,000 to 120,000. And that, Marcus added, doesn't include emotional distress, false CPS reports, or defamation. Karen visibly flinched. One of her board members quietly slid her chair back. A man near the door muttered, "Holy hell." "Let me be clear." Marcus said. I'm not suing that OA, I'm suing Karen, personally. He pulled out a thick envelope. This is a formal lawsuit. Already filed. Gasps echoed through the crowd. Karen went pale. Everything she used to control this community, the letters, the threats, the fake authority, was based on fraud. And the law is very clear: fraud has consequences. At that moment, an elderly man in the back stood up. My home built in 1992. I've been paying HOA fees for 20 years. Am I exempt too? Another voice joined. She fined us for painting our fence. Said it violated OA color codes. Our house was built in '89. Dozens of people began talking at once. The room erupted into chaos, not in anger at Marcus, but at Karen. One of the board members took the mic. Due to this new information, I motion to remove Karen as HOA president, effective immediately. A second board member stood up, seconded. The third, previously silent, nodded. All in favor, hands shot up. It wasn't even close. Karen stood frozen as the motion passed unanimously. Just like that, her reign ended. The rest of the night was a blur. Neighbors who had once avoided Marcus and Sophie now approached with apologies and offers of help. An elderly couple brought cookies. Teenagers who had once mocked Sophie now asked about her swing set and invited her to a local bonfire. For the first time since they arrived, Marcus and Sophie felt not just tolerated, but welcomed. Outside the community center, as the crowd slowly dispersed, Marcus looked down at his daughter. She was smiling. You did this, he whispered. You found the truth, you protected us. Sophie nodded, wiping away a tear. I think Grandpa would be proud. The aftermath of the HOA meeting rippled through the community like a shockwave. Word spread quickly that Karen had been officially removed from her position, that she was facing multiple personal lawsuits, and that the entire premise of her authority had been a lie built on forged documents and intimidation. The neighborhood, once divided by whispers and suspicion, was now united by outrage and a collective sense of betrayal. Karen's resignation was not enough to contain the fallout. Several long-time residents began reviewing their own records and realized they, too, had been targeted by Karen's fraudulent authority. One elderly couple discovered that they had been paying illegal HOA fees for nearly 15 years. Their fixed income drained by a woman who had no legal claim over them. Another single mother found documents showing her home had also been exempt from HOA jurisdiction, yet she'd been fined multiple times over the years for arbitrary violations. The new HOA board, eager to restore trust, initiated a full-scale investigation and hired an independent legal firm to audit the organization's activities under Karen's leadership. The findings were damning. Over 200 zalozin in illegally collected fees, unrecorded transactions, and fabricated violation reports were uncovered. Refunds were issued to affected homeowners, and a class-action civil suit was filed against Karen, with Marcus's case leading the charge. Sophie, once the isolated and grief-stricken teenager, had become a local hero. Her meticulous research and relentless pursuit of the truth had not only protected her own family, but also liberated an entire community from the grip of fear. Children who had once been told to stay away from her now played with her at the lake. Their laughter, echoing through the woods, became the sound of healing. At home, Sophie and Marcus installed a new wooden sign at the cabin, Lakeside Cabin, Est. 1991, protected by Grandpa since 1996, a free and Karen-proof forever. The cabin, once a place marked by grief, had been reclaimed. It now stood as a symbol of resilience, truth and family. As for Karen, she quietly sold her house and moved out within 60 days, per the settlement terms. No farewell parties, no dramatic exits. Just a moving truck and a closed chapter. Rumor had it she took a job selling insurance in another town, trying to rebuild what remained of her reputation. But in this neighborhood, her name had become a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when power is abused. Marcus and Sophie hosted a lakeside picnic a month later, inviting all the neighbors, old and new. The event was filled with warmth, apologies, and new beginnings. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly widow who had cried during the HOA meeting, brought Sophie a basket of homemade cookies and a thank-you letter. Other families shared stories of their own quiet battles with Karen and expressed gratitude that someone had finally stood up. Marcus watched his daughter from a distance as she laughed and chatted with new friends. It was a sight he thought he might never see again. For the first time since his wife's death, their life felt full again, not just with justice, but with hope. The victory wasn't just legal. It was emotional. It was personal. Karen had tried to tear them down using fear and lies. But in the end, it was truth, love, and persistence that triumphed. And Sophie. She knew her mother and grandfather would have been proud. 2 months later, the lakeside cabin had changed. It was no longer a place of tears and fear, but of healing and rebirth. Sophie had repainted the old porch swing, her mother's favorite spot. She even crafted a small wooden sign and hung it on the porch beam, written in her own hand. Lakeside Cabin, established 1991, Protected by Grandpa since 1996, forever OA free, no room for Karen, Marcus stood behind her, heart full. His daughter had made it through the darkest days of her life, and now, she was smiling, a genuine, radiant smile. A group of neighborhood kids ran up to the porch, calling Sophie out to play, inviting her to float paper boats on the lake. These were the same kids who once avoided her, listening to their parents' whispers. Now, they were her friends. Inside the cozy kitchen, Marcus opened an old cupboard where his grandfather used to keep his favorite tea. Inside, the note was still there. Handwritten, slightly faded, for my future granddaughter. May this always be your safe place. No one has the right to control your joy. This story wasn't just about exposing a tyrannical HOA president. It was about legacy. About quiet strength. And the unbreakable love between a father and daughter. And if you're out there, ever feeling helpless, ever bullied, ever ready to give up, just remember sometimes, it only takes one step forward to rewrite your entire story. Marcus and Sophie had no power. No influence. No media backing them. No army behind their cause. All they had was the truth, their love for each other, and an unshakable will to stand their ground. They were slandered, manipulated, and threatened with being torn apart. But they never backed down. Armed with nothing more than a father's coding skills and a daughter's determination to uncover the truth, they exposed an entire system built on lies. The lesson here is simple, yet powerful. You don't need to be the strongest. You just need to be right, and brave enough to stand up for it. No matter who you are, where you live, or what you're going through right now. Know this: you are not alone. Others have stood where you stand, afraid, shaken. But they still chose courage. And sometimes all it takes is one step forward, to change everything. Forever. If this story moved you even just a little, if you found yourself rooting for Sophie and Marcus, or felt your heart race when the truth was finally revealed, then do me one small favor: smash that like button. It might seem like a simple click, but it tells the algorithm that stories like this matter. That standing up against bullies, protecting what's rightfully yours, and honoring family legacies, deserves to be heard. Leave a comment below, and tell me. What would you have done if you were in Marcus's shoes? Have you ever stood up to someone misusing their power? Or maybe, you just want to say something to Sophie. I read every word. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that they are not powerless. That justice can win, and sometimes all it takes is one brave step forward. And if you want more stories like this, stories that inspire, challenge, and maybe even heal, then hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell. You're not just supporting the channel. You're joining a community that believes in truth, courage, and real justice.